What if I told you that a black man in medieval Europe could wake up tomorrow as a respected knight, and by sunset be sold into slavery based on nothing more than where he came from? This wasn't just possible. It was the harsh reality that thousands faced every single day in medieval Europe. You've probably been told that black people didn't exist in medieval Europe, but what you're about to discover will shock you. Not only were they there, but their lives were filled with dangers and horrors that most people today can't even imagine. By the end of this video, you'll understand why being black in medieval times meant living with constant fear, and why some of their stories will keep you awake at night. So what was it really like? What made their lives so terrifying? And why has this part of history been hidden from us for so long? Let me paint you a picture of medieval Europe. Imagine walking through the streets of London in the year 1300. The smell of waste fills the air. Disease spreads through crowded markets. Life is hard for everyone. But if you're black, you face dangers that others don't even think about. They were generals, knights, saints, cardinals, nobility, conquistadors, mercenaries, musicians, cooks, housekeepers, dock workers, slaves, and assistants. Yes, black people filled every level of medieval society. But here's what's terrifying. Your status could change in an instant. Think about this for a moment. You could be a respected merchant one day, trading goods across Europe. But if war broke out, if your city was attacked, or if someone simply decided you didn't belong, everything could change. Slaves were often outsiders taken in war. As such, Hebrew and Islamic thinking both conceived of the slave as an enemy within. Can you imagine living with that constant fear? Never knowing if today would be the day someone decided you were worth more as property than as a person. But wait, it gets worse, much worse. Most medieval Europeans would live their entire lives without ever coming into contact with non-Europeans. This meant that when people saw a black person, they often didn't know what to think. Some saw them as exotic curiosities, others saw them as threats, and some saw them as opportunities for profit. Let me tell you about the most shocking betrayal of all. Picture this: you're a black soldier, fighting alongside white knights to defend a Christian city. You risk your life, you bleed for the cause, you prove your loyalty over and over again. But when the battle is over, when the victory celebrations begin, you might find yourself being sold to slave traders by the very people you just saved. Why? Because justifications for slavery throughout the medieval period were dominated by the perception of religious difference and racial otherness. Even if you were Christian, even if you fought for Christian causes, your skin color marked you as different, and different meant dangerous to many medieval minds. Are you starting to see how terrifying this was? Your loyalty meant nothing. Your service meant nothing. Your humanity could be questioned at any moment. Now, let's talk about the daily horrors that black people faced. Imagine waking up every morning not knowing if you'd be free by evening. This wasn't paranoia. This was reality for thousands of people. Crimean Tatar raiders enslaved more than 1 million Eastern Europeans. The medieval world was built on slavery, and black people were often the most vulnerable targets. But here's what's truly horrific: the reasons they gave for this treatment. European writers established a hitherto unheard of connection between accursed people, Africa, and slavery, which laid the ideological groundwork for justifying the transatlantic slave trade. They literally created stories about black people being cursed by God to justify treating them as less than human. Can you imagine living in a world where people believed you were born cursed, where they thought God himself had marked you for suffering? This wasn't just prejudice. This was a complete system designed to destroy black lives and dignity. But the psychological torture didn't stop there. In theory, slaves who converted could embark on the path to freedom, but practices were inconsistent. Masters were not obliged to manumit them, and the practice of baptizing slaves was often discouraged. Think about what this means. They offered hope: become Christian and you might be free. But then they snatched it away. They created a system where black people could never truly escape, no matter how much they tried to fit in, no matter how much they sacrificed. What do you think that does to a person's mind? To know that even following all the rules, even converting to their religion, even serving their cause, might still not be enough to secure your freedom. Here's where it gets even more twisted. Some black people did rise to positions of power. They were generals, knights, saints, cardinals, nobility. But can you imagine the constant pressure they faced? Every single day, they had to prove they deserved their position. Every mistake was seen as proof that black people couldn't handle responsibility. Every success was treated as surprising rather than earned. And here's the most chilling part. Even the successful ones lived in constant fear. Because in medieval Europe, political fortunes changed quickly. A powerful black nobleman could become a slave again if his protector died, if the political winds shifted, or if someone simply decided he had become too powerful. Let me share with you one of the most heartbreaking aspects of black life in medieval Europe. Family meant everything in medieval society. But for black people, families were constantly torn apart. Imagine being a parent and knowing that your children could be taken away and sold at any moment. Imagine being a child and watching your parents dragged away, never to be seen again. Church and state laws produce surveillance, tagging, herding, incarceration, legal murder, and expulsion. While this quote refers to Jewish persecution, it shows the kind of systematic oppression that marginalized groups faced in medieval Europe. Black people experienced similar surveillance and control. They were watched constantly. Their movements were restricted. They were marked as different in ways that made them easy targets for violence or enslavement. Can you imagine living under that kind of constant scrutiny? Never being able to relax, never being able to let your guard down. But perhaps the most horrific part of all was the loneliness. Most medieval Europeans would live their entire lives without ever coming into contact with non-Europeans. This means that many black people lived as the only person of their race in entire towns or regions. Picture yourself as the only black person in a village of hundreds. Everyone stares at you. Everyone whispers about you. You have no one who understands what you're going through. No one who looks like you. No one who shares your experiences. That kind of isolation can drive people to despair. And when things went wrong, when crops failed, when disease struck, when wars were lost, guess who often got blamed? The outsider, the different one, the person who was already viewed with suspicion. Now, you might be wondering, were there any bright spots? Did any black people find happiness in medieval Europe? The truth is complicated and heartbreaking. Some did achieve remarkable things. There were black scholars, black religious leaders, black merchants who built successful businesses. But even their successes came with a price. They had to constantly prove themselves. They had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. And they always lived with the knowledge that their position was more fragile than that of their white counterparts. Many of them were full members of society, though others were marginalized, enslaved, or otherwise excluded. But here's the key word: many, not most or all. Even the successful ones lived with constant uncertainty. Think about what this does to a person's mental state. You achieve success, but you can never truly enjoy it because you know it could disappear at any moment. You build relationships, but you always wonder if people truly see you as equal or if they're just tolerating you. You try to plan for the future, but the future feels uncertain in ways that others don't experience. The most shocking betrayal I mentioned earlier. Here it is in all its horrific detail. There are records of black soldiers who fought in the Crusades, risking their lives for Christian causes. They bled alongside white knights, saved Christian cities, and proved their courage over and over again. But when the campaigns ended, some of these same brave warriors were sold into slavery by their former comrades in arms. Can you imagine a more complete betrayal? You fight for someone's cause, you save their life, you prove your loyalty in the most extreme circumstances possible, and they repay you by selling you like cattle. This wasn't rare, this wasn't an accident. This was a systematic pattern that shows just how little black lives mattered to many medieval Europeans. What does this tell us about the mindset of the time? That skin color was seen as more important than actions. That prejudice was stronger than gratitude. That even the most extreme proofs of loyalty and courage couldn't guarantee basic human dignity for black people. But the horrors didn't end with individual betrayals. The entire legal system was designed to work against black people. Laws were written and interpreted in ways that made it easier to enslave black people and harder for them to gain freedom. Courts rarely took the word of a black person over that of a white person. Justice was not blind. It was colored by racial prejudice. And here was truly chilling. Many of these injustices were done in the name of Christianity. In the Christian tradition, pagans and heretics were similarly considered enemies of the faith who could be justly enslaved. They used religion, which was supposed to teach love and compassion, to justify hatred and oppression. Imagine being a deeply religious black person in medieval Europe. You believe in the same God, you follow the same teachings, you attend the same churches, but you're told that your enslavement is God's will. You're told that your suffering is divine punishment. How do you reconcile your faith with such treatment? Many black people in medieval Europe lived with this spiritual crisis every day. They had to find ways to believe in a loving God while experiencing a world that seemed to have no love for them. The psychological impact of all this was devastating. Modern psychologists have studied the effects of racism and systematic oppression, and we know it causes lasting trauma. But imagine experiencing this in an age with no understanding of mental health, no therapy, no support systems. People had to endure these psychological wounds with no help, no understanding, and often no hope of things getting better. Children grew up knowing they were seen as less valuable than others. Parents lived with constant fear for their children's safety. Elderly people watched as the world around them became increasingly hostile. Entire families lived under the shadow of potential separation and sale. Can you imagine the conversations black parents had to have with their children? Be careful who you trust. Don't stand out too much. Always be respectful, even when others aren't respectful to you. And remember, no matter how well things seem to be going, everything could change tomorrow. What kind of childhood is that? What kind of life is that? Yet despite all of this, despite the constant danger, the betrayals, the loneliness, the systematic oppression, many black people in medieval Europe found ways to survive and even thrive. They created their own communities where possible. They supported each other in secret. They preserved their dignity in the face of dehumanizing treatment. Some converted to Christianity and found genuine spiritual comfort, even in a religious system that was often used against them. Others maintained connections to their original cultures and beliefs, keeping alive traditions and knowledge from Africa and other parts of the world. But here's what's most important to understand. Their strength doesn't diminish the horror of what they experienced. Their survival doesn't make the injustices acceptable. Their achievements don't excuse the systematic oppression they faced. Africans have been present in England for more than 2,000 years, but we rarely see them or hear about them. This erasure from history is itself a form of violence. By pretending these people didn't exist, we dishonor their memory and fail to learn from their experiences. So why has this history been hidden? Why aren't these stories taught in schools? Why do so many people still believe that medieval Europe was entirely white? The answer is uncomfortable but important. For centuries, people with power have benefited from the idea that Europe has always been a white space. This myth has been used to justify discrimination, to exclude people, and to deny the long history of diversity in European societies. But the truth is more complex and more interesting. They came as traders, as explorers, as warriors, or for those we only know by the archaeological record for many reasons that we will never know. Black people were part of European history from the very beginning. They contributed to European culture, fought in European wars, built European cities, and died for European causes. Their stories deserve to be told. Their suffering deserves to be remembered. Their achievements deserve to be celebrated. And their experiences deserve to help us understand how racial prejudice works and how it can be fought. What can we learn from these medieval experiences? First, that racism isn't natural or inevitable. It's created by people for political and economic reasons. The justifications given for enslaving black people in medieval Europe weren't based on science or religion or natural law. They were based on greed and fear and the desire to maintain power over others. Second, we learn that resilience is possible even in the darkest circumstances. The black people of medieval Europe faced horrors that would break many of us today. Yet they found ways to maintain their humanity, to care for each other, and to survive in impossible situations. Third, we learn that history is always more complicated than we first think. The medieval period wasn't just about knights and castles and princesses. It was about real people dealing with real problems, including the problem of racism and oppression. And finally, we learn that forgetting history is dangerous. When we erase the experiences of marginalized people from our understanding of the past, we make it easier to repeat the same mistakes in the future. The black men and women of medieval Europe lived lives of incredible difficulty. They faced dangers that were both immediate and systemic. They experienced betrayals that cut to the core of human trust. They endured loneliness that would crush most spirits, and they did it all in a world that often saw them as less than human. But they also lived lives of remarkable courage. They built communities in hostile environments. They achieved success against impossible odds. They maintained their dignity when everything around them tried to strip it away. They loved their families fiercely and protected them as best they could. They found ways to laugh, to create, to hope, and to survive. Their stories are part of our shared human history. They remind us of both the worst and the best of human nature. They show us the true cost of prejudice and the true power of resilience. As we face our own challenges with racism and discrimination today, we can learn from their experiences. We can honor their memory by refusing to let such systematic oppression happen again. We can celebrate their achievements by acknowledging the full complexity of human history. And we can ensure that their stories are never forgotten again. So the next time someone tells you that medieval Europe was a simple time and place, remember the black men and women who lived through its complexities. Remember their struggles and their triumphs. Remember that they were there, that they mattered, and that their experiences have shaped the world we live in today. What do you think about these revelations? Did any of these facts shock you? Have you heard these stories before? Or is this the first time you're learning about the black presence in medieval Europe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. If you found this video eye-opening, you Lions definitely want to watch our next video about the hidden African kingdoms that shaped medieval trade routes. The stories of these powerful empires will completely change how you think about medieval history. Click the link in the description or the video that's popping up right now. And if you want to learn more shocking truths about history that they don't teach in school, make sure to subscribe to the History Teller and hit that notification bell. We post new videos every week that reveal the hidden stories of our past. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is never as simple as it seems. There are always more stories to discover, more truths to uncover, and more lessons to learn. See you in the next video.